I like to experiment with different methods for learning languages, and it's about time for my next experiment. So, about a month ago, I decided to try out the method from Luca Lampariello, who is a YouTuber slash polyglot, who I think is pretty legit, who uses a method called the bidirectional translation method. And I'll get into exactly what that means in more detail later, but basically it's when you find content that you translate from your target language into your native language and then back into your target language. And it seems to work very well for him, so I had to try it out. But first I wanted to talk a little bit about where I'm coming from. So basically with my cheesy little language experiments so far, I've been using French as my sort of guinea pig language. And so that started with me doing about like an 8-month long experiment with just using comprehensible input, just listening, just reading, just watching Netflix, just listening to podcasts, that kind of thing. Like a very, very strict experiment. And that got me to a certain point. You can check out my video on that too if you wanted to. And then I went to France to do a formal French course. That was the next little cheesy experiment that I did. And then I sort of explored France for a little bit on my own, kind of like making friends around and kind of practicing in real life. And that trip ended, and so that's kind of a bummer, but I found myself in the dreaded Intermediate Plateau after that trip. If you don't know what the Intermediate Plateau is, basically it's a point in everyone's language learning experience that they eventually reach where after they get through a lot of their beginner material and they learn a lot of new exciting words and you learn a lot of things really quickly, you reach a point where you run out of new quote-unquote easy things to learn, and the easy stuff slash material design for beginners gets a little bit too easy and boring for you, and the advanced stuff like native-like material is too advanced for you. So you're stuck in this awkward period of time where the things that you need to learn are hard to find, and they're not as frequent as like the beginner material. So you're stuck in like language purgatory for a little while. And so coming down from the trip and being in the Intermediate Plateau in my French learning progress was kind of a big bummer all at once, so I decided it was time to start the next experiment. But before I get into that method itself, I wanted to show you me being in the Intermediate Plateau. So here's a sample of where I'm coming from at the beginning of this experiment from about a month ago. Bonjour, aujourd'hui je suis en train de commencer un nouveau challenge de l'apprentissage des langues. Mon dernier challenge, c'était le input compréhensible, et après ça, c'était le cours traditionnel. Et aujourd'hui, je vais commencer avec la traduction bidirectionnelle. Et je voulais vous donner une petite vidéo pour vous montrer mon niveau dans ce moment. Donc je pense que ça c'est tout pour aujourd'hui, et après 30 jours de la traduction bidirectionnelle, je vais vous faire une nouvelle vidéo avec peut-être mon français amélioré. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully it wasn't too bad, and if you're French, I hope I didn't offend you. And if I did, let me know. I didn't say anything that bad. But now let's talk about exactly what I did to experiment with this bidirectional translation method. Luca Lampariello himself goes through his method in a video, but he also sells a course on the method itself. So full disclosure, I didn't buy the course. I took the entire method from just the free video that I found on YouTube. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. So if what I'm doing differs from what he does in the course and you know what's in the course, sorry, that's why I'm explaining exactly what I did personally so that there's no mistake about how the method itself is represented. And so here's what that looked like. I got all of my material from the Inner French YouTube channel, and I thought this was kind of like the perfect material to do it because he offers his transcripts for free to his YouTube videos. And he also has a way of throwing in like advanced words and phrases in a purposeful way that makes it easier for you to learn. And his material is very compelling and interesting. I thought it would make the perfect material for me. And it's about intermediate level with the intention of getting you to the advanced level. So what I would do is I would take one of his transcripts, I would put it up on one side of my screen, and then open up a Word doc on the other side of my screen, and then I would get to translating. I would translate the transcript from French into English in an empty Word doc. I found that a good ratio of time to spend for me would be about 40 minutes of translating from French to English would amount to about 20 minutes of translating from English back to French. And I mention this because I really like these methods and my videos to be kind of helpful for people who like have normal busy lives to begin with. So if you don't have like 8 hours to 16 hours a day to dedicate to learning a language, I want this sort of mini experiment to be meaningful for, people with other things going on in their lives. So that 40 minutes plus 20 minutes ratio is sort of to give you an idea of what like a 1 hour a day language learning routine would look like. Okay, and so that's day one. On the first day, translate from French to English for about 40 minutes. It doesn't really even matter how many words you get through. It just matters how much time, in my opinion, because you don't want to rush through it in like a non-quality way. You want to get through what you can actually understand in a meaningful way. And then so wait a day after that, and then I would translate my English transcript that I wrote into back into French. I would do this by hand for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to slow myself down a little bit and sort of like really process what I was writing by hand. I find that there's something else that goes on in my brain when I write by hand, and I just like writing by hand. And then after I did that, I would compare how accurate my translation into French was to the original transcript. And then I would go back and try to find words and phrases that stood out to me and sort of like record them at the top and highlight them and say like, this was a new phrase for me, or this phrase showed up a lot. This might be really worth like paying attention to and learning and memorizing. Same with like little words that I found neat or helpful, or maybe I just kind of like the word. And sometimes on top of that, I would start to notice a grammar structure that I wasn't familiar with before. So I would record those and sometimes even go into like a little bit deeper research on a grammar structure that I would notice. I was kind of like uncovering grammar structures as I go. If I noticed something was said a certain way, I would say, hey, that's interesting. I'll look into that and then record that grammar structure at like the top of my page or something. That would be reinforced in the coming days when I, repeated this day to day. And I also wanted to briefly emphasize here, like I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, that you do not do the whole transcript in one sitting unless you have the time for it. It is what you get through in the time that you have allotted. It's not the entire 10-minute video transcript, because that equates to like, for me, like 8 hours of translating. That would be a bit much for me and a bit much for most people. It is whatever you get through in the allotted amount of time that you've given yourself. For me, 40 to 20 minute ratio. You can do whatever you want though. You can do it for as long as you want. Okay, now let's check out a clip of how well that worked out for me. I really don't think you're going to notice that much of a difference. It's just a month's worth of time, but I still wanted to show you the clip because, everyone's curious. everyone wants the proof of if a method works or not. So here that is.
Bonjour, aujourd'hui je voulais vous montrer mon progrès après un mois d'utiliser la traduction bidirectionnelle. Mais cette fois, au lieu de dire n'importe quoi, je voulais ajouter un petit message sur la motivation et la comparaison avec des autres apprenantes, plus précisément les youtubeurs. Ce que je voulais dire, c'est que quand les youtubeurs, comme moi, je suppose, fait en vidéo, on a la chance, on a la capacité de choisir le sujet. Et beaucoup de fois, on choisit exactement le même thème qui est l'apprentissage de langue lui-même parce qu'on aime ce thème. Ça, c'est exactement le cas dans cette vidéo maintenant. Et pour cette raison, tu n'as droit comparer. Tu n'as si tu es en train d'apprendre une langue et tu n'as pas exactement le même progrès ou le même résultat que le youtubeur, c'est pas grave. Parce que peut-être que tu as une autre spécialisé. Peut-être que tu as un thème et que tu as plus de vocabulaire et que tu peux parler plus couramment. Donc, cette vidéo a mon progrès dans mon meilleur jour, en fait. Mais oui, je pense que ça c'est tout. Oui, c'est tout.
Okay, now I want to mention why I thought this language method is awesome, and then talk about why there are some things that are less awesome about it. The first awesome thing is that there is no hiding from your mistakes. You feel like almost naked when you're translating back into your target language. You have to figure out how you're going to say it. And then eventually at the end of your translation session, figure out what like the most natural or right way to say it is. And I think that's very different than what I normally do, where I kind of like brush off little mistakes when I'm like talking to native speakers. I kind of like push my mistakes aside for the sake of conversation, which is good, but it's not very thorough when it comes to like a purely learning context. Same thing happens to me when I'm like just listening to a podcast. I'm not going to pause the podcast every single time I don't understand something. I have to pause to figure out something that I don't understand when I am doing this bidirectional translation method. So that's pretty cool, although frustrating. And next is that this method is kind of all-encompassing. It is like the hallmark of effective language learning is that you want to tackle it from multiple directions. You have to, first of all, read through your target material and understand it, so you're getting input through reading. And then you have to translate it from your target language into your native language. So you have to understand exactly what it says in order to do that. And then you're going to have to translate it back. So you're practicing producing the language as well. And then to take it a step further, I even got my transcripts from videos. So I have an audible format to go along with it if I so choose, which I did also watch the videos, of course. And I think that it will help you improve in like a very deep way for that reason. There aren't really many, but it is worth mentioning that this is really hard. This is a little bit mentally taxing for me personally to do this every single day, even though I did take some day or 2 day long breaks. Building a routine around this is really hard. To know that every time that you're practicing the language, you're doing it in like a very intense way, which is very good for your progress. But if you burn out doing it and lose motivation, which for me is very fragile, that could be seen as a negative aspect of this method, which there are actually a few times when I was like, ugh, I kind of just don't want to do this tonight. But, you know, you push through and it does end up helping. But it is very hard to hold this in a routine for me personally. And another gripe that I had while I was doing this, it was very hard for me to tell if the way I chose to say something was the right way. Sometimes I would write something that was what I thought meant the same thing as the original text because I couldn't remember word for word exactly what the original text said. And I would not be sure if what I wrote meant the exact same thing and even had the same connotation, or if what I wrote meant something completely different in context compared to the original text. And so it'd be kind of hard for me to figure that out. And sometimes I would be able to figure it out, and sometimes I would kind of be left wondering if I even wrote something valid or not. To sum it all up, I think it is perfectly awesome. It's definitely worth trying. You should definitely give it a go. But for me personally, I'm not going to do this every single day like I did for the little experiment, because it's not how I want to learn every single day. It's how I am in the mood to learn, maybe like once or twice a week instead. And I know maybe I'll learn slower, but it's how I keep my motivation. And like I kind of said before, my motivation is a little bit fragile compared to most. So I want to make sure that I'm doing things that I am like in the mood for, and I'm not forcing myself to do this, and I'm not turning it into a chore. I'm keeping it as something that's like fun for me to do. But it is definitely like a gold standard way of learning a language, in my opinion. It might not be something that you start with, and it might not be something that you do every day, but doing this like habitually in some way, I think is going to be extremely beneficial. And that being said, if you look at like my result video, it's not that different from a month before, because I just don't think that people learn languages that fast at this stage. Like there's not going to be that noticeable of a difference. If you choose to try this, the difference that you're going to notice is more felt than seen on the outside. You're just going to feel a little more confident in a specific situation where a phrase that you picked up is useful, and you're going to feel a little more fluent and confident because of how you practice writing something in a certain way, and you know it's correct because you had to study it in a deep way. But yeah, don't take this for an endorsement that this method is like the catch-all for everything and it's going to make you fluent in the month, because I started from about a year of experience and I only added on about one more month of experience. And it's kind of a cop-out to say, but every single time I do one of these things, I say like, well, this is just a little experiment, and a month of experience is just a month. You're not going to learn 8,000 words in the span of a month and all of a sudden become an advanced speaker. So if you weren't convinced by Luca Lampariello already, I think this is legit. I think you should totally try it if you're interested by it, you know, with those caveats I just mentioned. If you do choose to try it, or if you have tried it already, I would love to hear how it went for you or what you think. But other than that, that is it for me.